the purpose of the conversation that I'd like for us to have today, and this is something that Harmony and Prosperity, our organization, conducted at Freedom Fest when we were sitting down and having conversations with people. There's a principle that we've discovered called the principle of human respect. We're actually giving pins at Freedom Fest with a
I
smiley
wore
face,
one.
if you
Your team
recall.
gave me one. Yes.
And so what we would like to do is, with libertarians such as yourself, is to share our philosophy. And hopefully this is something that you can also share with conversations that you have with people, with on the campaign trail, in debates. And what I was hoping we could maybe do today is have a conversation just like we would have a conversation with someone who is either a conservative or someone who is progressive, to help them look at things maybe from a different angle. And we're hoping that through this principle that we've discovered of human respect, that we can achieve that. How does that sound? Okay,
That sounds
excellent.
good.
Okay, beautiful. All right. So, and, of course, the purpose of, in addition to helping people see things from a different perspective, is we want to create more harmony and prosperity in our society. And in order to achieve that, we need more persuasion and less coercion. And we're going to get into that a little bit deeper through our conversation today.
Well, as you might imagine, that sounds good from my point of view.
Good, good. I'm glad to hear that. So something that we often ask people when we have conversations with them is a very simple question. Can you agree with the statement that everyone wants to be happy?
I believe that everyone wants to be happy. I would suggest that it's probably human psychology, of course, is more complex than that.
Mhm.
Not only do different people want to be happy in different ways, but there are circumstances in which an individual might define happiness as too narrow an objective and actually pursue something that would make them either in the short run not as happy, but in the long run happy, or uh, pursue objectives that they perceive as more important than their own personal happiness, either on behalf of others, in pursuit of their faith, for example. I was raised by a Lutheran and a Calvinist. So if you were to say to my family, your objective is to be happy, they would reject that out of hand. They would say there are a lot more important things than your personal happiness, and that includes to each of us as an individual. If you were to define happiness broadly, of course, in the sense of it bringing personal gratification, juxtaposed whatever objectives you personally have, then yes, everyone wants to be happy in the broadest of definitions.
Mhm, mhm. But, and also, could you agree that the happiness and the well-being of others also in turn brings happiness for ourselves?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, I would argue that that is the greatest source of personal gratification, is being able to uh, either provide some service or do something uh,
Mhm,
to make those that are around us better off.
mhm, mhm. Great. Okay. And also, with these conversations that we have with people, and when we talk about happiness, it's always important to reiterate that we're not trying to change their personal values. What we want to do is we want people to be able to hold on to their values, but to make sure that their values are aligned with their social ethics. Someone can have conservative values, someone can have more progressive values, but how they go about sharing their values and achieving what they would like to see in society is important, to take it with a more persuasive action versus a coercive. And as a libertarian, I'm sure you can see how a lot of the social issues that are happening in our society are often with force versus just having a conversation to come to a consensus.
Uh, I agree wholeheartedly. As a matter of fact, I would consider it a core principle of libertarianism that coercion not be used
Mm-hmm.
in any context. taking it one step up, I think it's important for libertarians to remember and to impress upon others that public policy is inherently and must be viewed as downstream from culture, not not the other way around. In other words, we must not allow ourselves, as many would, we must not, for the sake of our society, we must not allow people to try to use public policy to drive culture.
Mm-hmm.
Culture must be upstream, and in that sense, the driver of public policy. When public policy gets out ahead of culture, not only do you see the use of government force and coercion to try to impose some group of individuals' values on others, which is, of course, problematic, but it's also where we get into the technical types of problems. For example, the creation of black markets.
Mm-hmm.
Just as an example, although arguably one of the primary examples, the war on drugs. This is an area where I believe government policy has been used to try to affect culture.
Mm-hmm.
And what we run into is, because culture is not ready to acquiesce to the certain values of those who have put this public policy in place, what we have is a robust, huge black market in drugs, which makes it all the more dangerous. Black markets kill. When you drive these activities underground by making them illegal, they become much, much more dangerous, and it makes it more difficult to treat the problems at hand than if you had left it alone in the first place. So I think that there's an ethical aspect to the point you make, but I also think that there's a technical one, an economic one, a bad result operationally at the end.
Okay. The next question I'd like to ask you, and keep in mind, this is a conversation where, let's say you're having this with someone who has maybe some different values and ideas as to how to go about solving social issues.
Different ideas than mine? Are there such people, Jamie?
There are, believe it or not.
All right, I'll try to use my imagination. Go ahead.
Great. Okay, and these are very quick, common sense questions, but there's no trick here. If someone intentionally and physically harmed you, would that decrease your happiness?
It would absolutely decrease my happiness, both from a personal standpoint, as well as lamenting my inability to figure out what's going on with this person.
And do you think that this is always the case? That it would always decrease your happiness if you were physically harmed?
I think it would always decrease my happiness to be physically harmed.
Now, what if someone stole from you or vandalized your property? Would that decrease your happiness?
I believe so, yes.
Always?
Oh, always? Yes. I suppose we could all conjure up quirky situations where something was stolen from us that we didn't need, didn't want, and figured that someone else would be better off with it. This actually happened to me a couple of years ago. I was trying to figure out how to get rid of a generator and accidentally left it on my driveway while thinking about it, and someone stole it 2 nights later. And it had to make me chuckle. I thought, well, maybe I'm out the $25 I could have gotten for it, but hopefully someone is making better use of it. But in general, aside from quirky situations, yes, to cause theft to someone, to cause vandalism to someone, is virtually uniformly going to decrease their happiness.
And do you think that that is always the case?
Aside from quirky situations, I think that is probably always the case.
So now we have, 3 universal statements, and taken together, we have a principle. And I had mentioned that previously, in the beginning of our discussion, and we're going to talk about the principle of human respect, that theft and violence always reduce happiness, harmony, and prosperity. And something that we like to share with people when discussing a principle, just to help them gain a deeper understanding, is we like to use the cause and effect principle in nature, and gravity being probably the best example. We all understand how gravity works. We learned about that in school. What goes up must come down. That's predictable and recurring. And we like to use that example when we talk about the principle of human respect, because just like gravity being a predictable and reoccurring state in nature, anytime a person experiences theft or violence, their happiness will always decrease. There's really no other way of going around it. It's predictable and recurring, just like the natural principle of gravity. And really that is the key point that we like to make in our discussions about the principle of human respect, is for people to understand the effects of those actions. And another question, and this might be a little bit a silly question, but in your day-to-day interactions, do you go about getting what you want by using violence or theft?
No, and I don't think that the vast majority of people do. I think it's a rare circumstance, and I think that individuals that do resort to
Yeah.
coercion or violence as a type of coercion, it is a complex web of reasons that lead people into these situations, psychological and economic, that result in these things. And when, of course, they're manifested in weird ways through public policy, it causes everyone problems.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And it really is, it comes down to just simple rules that we learned as children growing up. It's not okay to take things that don't belong to us. It's not okay to physically harm another person. But yet, as a person evolves throughout their life and you become adults, if it applies on the playground, for example, the same rules should apply in our life. And so that's what we're trying to help people understand, is if we wouldn't physically assault another human being or take their property, then why is it okay for it to happen in social issues, for example? So those are the connections that we're trying to help people
By
make.
social issues, you mean public policy?
Public policy, for example. And there's a lot of social issues out right now. I probably don't need to tell you, what they are. Something that, during this conversation, something else that we like to do when talking with someone, whether they be conservative or progressive, there are a few social issues that we like to touch upon. And I was hoping, if you would like, maybe we could role play a little bit, where, of course, I know you're a libertarian, but for the sake of this conversation, would you be willing to either choose a progressive or a conservative standpoint?
I can speak to what I believe that they would say. I'm not going to
Okay.
role play and pretend I am
Okay.
one, but I can speak
Okay.
to what it is I believe that such a person would say.
Okay. So let's talk about someone who is conservative. Some social issues being punishing people who are hiring undocumented immigrants, controlling adults who can and cannot marry, penalizing adults for using drugs. And you had touched upon that just a few moments ago about the black market. So are there any of those issues, or maybe something else that comes to mind that you'd like to
No,
discuss?
all of those are important issues. I think that as a society, we've made a tremendous amount of progress in the context of allowing people to marry whomever that they want. It was not 20 years ago that the majority of Americans were against the idea of gay marriage. As you know, libertarians led the way in making progress in terms of people understanding that the public policy should be changed in this regard. But yes, there are many conservatives still who have a problem with gay marriage, but I do believe that it is the right thing to do, irrespective of how you feel about it. It is the right thing to do for there not to be public policy in this area precluding people from doing what it is that they want to do.
Okay, so what are do you have any suggestions on how this issue can be addressed in a non-coercive way?
In other words, if a conservative had a problem with gay marriage uh, in the context of avoiding public policy to be your weapon of choice,
Mhm.
there are other things that you could do. You could try to make your case. And I think conservatives do. Conservatives frequently make their case. There are those who argue that uh, gay is, in some sense, against what the Bible teaches. And there
Mhm.
are people that make that argument all the time. There are conservatives who argue that homosexuality is not, in some sense, natural.
Mhm.
And so there are arguments that conservatives make. And to the extent to which that they think that their ideas carry water, just because I don't personally, but to the extent to which conservatives believe that their arguments can carry water, they should be making them publicly and sure, respectfully, because otherwise no one's going to listen to them. I think that diminishingly so are people willing to listen to them anyway, but there are plenty of outlets for people to make their case. These days you don't have to have access to legacy media, to traditional media in order to make your case. And so I think that people do in any number of social issues, people make their case.
Okay, okay. And so when a conservative tries to impose their beliefs on someone who believes what's the opposite of them, do you think that that's going to make someone else happier? When a conservative tries to impose their values on someone who's progressive, for example, do you think that by trying to force their beliefs on someone, that that's going to make the other person happier?
No, of course not. When you say force, I guess you mean through government violence. Um, uh, One could argue that by uh, forcefully making your argument, you're using force. I don't know if that's exactly what you mean by
Mhm.
force, but there are. I would not use force that way, by the way. I think it's
Okay.
important for us to draw a distinction between actual uh, violent force or physical force and the idea that someone forcefully makes
Mhm.
their case, makes their argument. I don't really have a problem with people with whom I disagree or people with whom I do agree. I don't have a problem with people vociferous voice, give voice to their strong opinions, and doing so in a very boisterous, a very loud fashion, one that they would consider compelling,
Mhm.
right? I don't have a problem with that. I think that we live in a society that uh, does allow and should allow people to make their case, and I think it's a society in which people can tune those out. So
Mhm.
I would not consider that to be force. I know some people like to use the word force for that. Is it possible that someone making their case forcefully, loud, not using physical force, can diminish someone else's happiness? Yes, I think that that's possible. On the other hand, I think that there are conservatives and others who would argue that if they could win the argument, if they could convince someone to perhaps live their lives the way that the speaker suggests, then in the long run, whoever hears that message could be happier.
Mhm.
I believe that there probably are such cases.
Mhm.
There is what has become slightly popular in the economics literature, for example, is this concept of a nudge, right? Giving someone a message that causes them to change their course, their decision making. I wouldn't consider that to be force, but sometimes a nudge is most effective when it is earnestly made. I don't have a problem with that.
Planting that seed.
Planting that seed, perhaps.
Yeah, yes, okay. Okay. Now, so moving on, do you recall what the principle of human respect is?
Well, the principle is that we should be that we should be, because we're better off when we respect individual autonomy, as opposed to coercing or using violence to change someone else's behavior, or to try to change someone else's thoughts. And this is what informs libertarians' attitude toward public policy.
Yes. Yes, and something, another exercise that we like to often do with people is what we like to call putting yourself in someone else's shoes. So for example, if I were speaking to someone who is conservative, talking about an issue such as punishing people for hiring undocumented, immigrants, they may feel very passionate and strongly believe that that's the right thing to do. Now, if I asked them, well, how would it feel if someone imposed gun control measures on them? Because that is a very hot topic when with the people who are considered conservative, kind of reversing the role. And asking them, well, how would it feel if the Democratic Party were trying to impose that on you? And so that's another step in this discussion about the principle of human respect that we try to focus on, is making sure that people can see things from both points of view.
I agree. The example you brought up is somewhat interesting to me because it's complex. The example that you brought up was asking someone else to see an issue through someone else's eyes, which of course is an important rhetorical and argumentative technique, and one that we all employ from time to time. Similarly, importantly, however, is the idea that when we come across someone with whom we disagree, that we ourselves put ourselves in their shoes and imagine why it is that they feel the way that they do. This is not to say to make some attempt to coerce them, but possibly to change how they feel about an issue, but also for us to grow personally. When we come across progressives or conservatives who may feel differently about an issue, it's important for us to be able to put ourselves in their shoes. I think that this is something that has gone wrong in our public discourse over the past generation, and has done so in a very profound way. I lay this squarely at the feet of our divergent media and public discourse driven by the media, because we now have the ability, we have for 30 or 40 years, depending on your definition, have had the ability to seek reinforcement of our opinions, and therefore we have lost touch with people who have different opinions than our own.
And oftentimes what happens is when people have different opinions than us, there's people who try to force their beliefs on others in a way where there's really no resolution. And that's where the coercion comes into play, and versus the.
And I believe that is exactly why we have a growing sense of authoritarianism out of our government, because each side has lost respect for the other, and therefore they feel either out of a sense of frustration or a sense of importance
Mhm.
and a sense of self-righteousness,
Mhm.
that it is their duty and their obligation and their opportunity to impose their values on others by using the government apparatus to do so.
Mhm. Mhm. Whereas instead of going about it in a coercive way, and that's kind of going back to what I discussed earlier about our values and our social ethics being aligned. I think there's people who have lost sight of that, where their social values are not, I mean, I'm sorry, their personal values are not aligned with their social ethics.
Right.
Uh, okay. I think we've definitely covered a lot of important information. Based on our conversation today, is there anything that you'd like to share? Any thoughts or ideas about the principle of human respect? Any ways on how you would maybe be interested in possibly sharing this with people that you have conversations with?
Yes, I think that it's as I mentioned before, I think it is a core principle of libertarianism that however we might personally feel about social issues, it is inappropriate for us to try to use government or any other form of coercion or violence
Mhm.
to try to change someone's behavior or to try to change someone's mind. As you know, it is a core principle of libertarianism, what we call the non-aggression principle, which I think aligns with what you and I are characterizing as the principle of respect. They are two sides of what I believe to be the same coin. As you know, I am most involved these days with public policy, but how we pursue our lives generally should be aligned with these principles. And we have to recognize that when we're trying to change someone's mind about how they should live their lives or how they should treat others and how they should go about affecting the way others live their lives, we have to do so in a respectful way, not merely because we don't believe in aggression, but because people recoil from attempts to be aggressive. And so it just as an objective, practical, empirical matter, it doesn't work to try to impose your values on someone else in a coercive fashion. And it's well for us to remember that.
Mhm.
Uh, I came to libertarianism uh, from what I would consider to be the right-hand side. I'll
Mhm.
characterize libertarianism as having two sides. The right-hand side is to say that the world works better when you allow people to make decisions for themselves. I grew
Mhm.
up a conservative economist in the financial services business, recognizing that our economy, for example, works much better when you allow individuals, employers, employees, investors to make decisions for themselves, just as a matter of being able to process information. And it was later in my life that I came to libertarianism from what I would consider the left-hand side, which is to say, even if the world didn't work better by allowing people to make decisions for themselves, it's still nonetheless the right thing to do. The example that I often give is imagine a world in which socialism worked, which is a funny thing for a libertarian to say, but it's also a funny thing for an economist to say. We know empirically, objectively, we know that socialism doesn't work in the sense of being as efficient relative to allowing people to make their own decisions in an environment of freedom. But if you were to imagine a world in which socialism worked, imagine that the government could make things work better,
Mhm.
could make people wealthier, increase income. The world would work more efficiently
Mhm.
if the government made all the decisions for us.
Mhm.
Would the government therefore have the right to do so? Arguably, to make everybody better off. The answer is no. The government would still not have the ethical right to impose what someone might argue to be even a better decision on
Mhm.
somebody else.
Mhm.
It is, I think, an element of happiness, to
Mhm.
use your term, for us to live our lives by our own standards and to make decisions for ourselves, including the right to learn from our mistakes and to make those mistakes that we're going to make, even if that means living our lives by values that are different from someone else's.
Mhm. Mhm. Absolutely. What are some things that you're hoping to accomplish during your campaign for president?
We are spreading the message that the government has gone too far in terms of making decisions for us, and that the results have been not only a growing sense of authoritarianism with which many Americans are now frustrated,
Mhm.
but also, speaking from both the left and the right side of libertarianism, also has undermined our economy. This
Mhm.
is where enormous amounts of debt comes from. It's where so much disruption has come from, not just in terms of inflation undermining our standard of living, but also creating such a huge bubble through the COVID regime in terms of unemployment, business closures, dips in wealth. Uh, all these things come from bad public policy, which has come from an increasing level of encroachment on our lives, which is to say, imposing decisions on us we wouldn't make on our own, definitionally coercive, and at the end of the day, backed up by the government's monopoly on the use of violence.
Mhm. And which has has decreased a lot of happiness.
Which has decreased a tremendous amount of happiness, however you define it.
That's true. I guess it is it could be different from one person to the other what that happiness looks
I
like.
believe that happiness is definitionally different from one person to another. I
Mhm.
think that happiness is definitionally, well, first of all, it's definitionally in the mind of the beholder, but it
Mhm.
is definitionally an alignment between what it is that you want and your
Mhm.
ability to get it. And that is different for each individual.
Do you agree that even though happiness is individualized, that a common thread is that everyone wants to feel harmony and they want to flourish in their life?
Yes, everyone would define it differently, but absolutely. I would suggest that's virtually tautological.
Mhm. Any How would you go about while you're, during your campaign and you're having different conversations with people, meeting people from all walks of life, people who maybe are unsure on how some of our issues that we're experiencing in our country, how do they think some people struggle with understanding, well, how can these issues be solved without government help? What are some suggestions that you give or some solutions to these problems?
I think for a lot of people, it helps to talk about particular examples rather than the principles themselves. You can lay out the principle, but it has to be reinforced with examples. And of course, we talk about that in the context of, as you and I alluded to earlier, the war on drugs.
Mhm.
Uh, when we drive these transactions underground, we undermine our ability to help people through their addiction. We have a giant addiction problem in the United States, of course, as you well know. Uh, Not only has addiction become a monumental problem over the generations, but quite recently, we have had a spike in deaths resulting from it, and in particular, fentanyl. The problem with fentanyl is, to pursue this example, the problem with fentanyl is not merely that it is a powerful drug, which it is. The problem with fentanyl is the black market. The problem is that people take different doses than than they believe that they are taking,
Mm,
because there is not a self-regulatory mechanism in
mhm,
place. There is no branding. There is no provider who is trusted, right? There is no labeling. There is no uniform method of making sure that what it is you think you're taking, you actually are. This is what leads to the vast majority of fentanyl deaths are mistakes. They are not intentional suicides. This is a problem with the black market. And just as an example, I think it's worth pointing out. Now, there are less practical examples that I think are useful to make. One of the examples that I use frequently is, imagine there were a vaccine that is what I call the hypothetically perfect vaccine. If you take it, you're going to live. This is proven, and you can trust the data, and you're absolutely going to live. Your life is going to be fine. And if you don't take it, you're going to die. Proven, 100% you're going to die. And proven there's zero side effects. And if you take it, 100% proven, it'll shut down transmissibility. All right, so this is a perfect vaccine, right? 100% perfect vaccine. Does the government have the right to force you to take it?
No.
No, that's exactly right. And for this reason, it's important for us to, I believe, home in on the idea this is not a debate among scientists. This is not a debate of science. This is not a debate about chemistry and physics. This is a debate about ethics. And for this reason, I believe that libertarians are not being led astray, but once in a while, by Robert Kennedy Jr., who I believe, and I think I don't think he would argue with me on this point, he has a problem with vaccine mandates because he has a problem with the vaccines. He's always making the scientific argument. And I think that that is a huge distraction and actually undermines our case. Because what it suggests is, well, if the vaccines were really good, you'd be okay with the mandate.
Correct, yeah.
And the answer has to be no. And we have any number of such examples in libertarian thought, which is why I believe, for example, it does not do us any good to argue against the drug prohibition by saying drugs are good. To say, well, you know, who doesn't like marijuana, right? We all like marijuana, and therefore it should be decriminalized. No, that's not the point. The point is that the government doesn't have the right to impose a prohibition on you, even if it were bad for you. And of course, this is what we see with fentanyl and any other number of issues. It does not do us any good to argue that something is either good or bad and therefore should be allowed or prohibited. The government does not have the right, which is to say others do not have the right to impose their values on you.
And I think that's what, you know, going back to what we had talked about earlier, it's making that alignment with our personal values and our social ethics. It's, we may believe in what we believe, but let's look at the ethical side of it. And I think you've made some very strong points. Absolutely. And you know, and something that, you know, we always like to ask people is who may not see things the way you do, for example, is, you know, what is in to teach them to start to think on their own rather than relying on the government to assist in solving a lot of these issues. Well, what can an individual in their community do to make a step forward in practicing the principle of human respect, holding on to their values, but going about it in a more ethical way?
I think that one thing that we should get more used to doing and has become more difficult over the years rather than less. Two different things. One is asking questions and one is shutting up. And sometimes those things go hand in hand. It used to be that we were very good at each one of those as a society. It used to be that you could ask people from a different group whether that group is defined by religion, or by job, the type of education, your beliefs, your race, your ethic, your community, your ethnicity. It used to be that we were better at asking questions than we are today. This is a relatively recent phenomenon. And it is, I believe, because we have become, as a society, so good at punishing each other for the implications of our questions. Why are you asking? Are you really that stupid? And this has seeped all the way down from the media level all the way down to individual conversations. I know that any number of people are less comfortable than they would have been a number of years ago in asking questions that are completely innocent and important.
Yes.
Right? Important not only because the education that comes from the answers, but because asking each other about each other, me asking you, you asking me how we feel about something, is also a way of building a bridge. It suggests that I respect, our differences. I respect you, even though you're different from me. And maybe I respect you because you're different from me. And I want to understand you. Ironically, I believe, our society in shutting down certain aspects of our conversation has undermined our ability to show respect for each other in this way. And the other thing I mentioned is being able to shut up. In public discourse, all too often, I think that, and this is, I believe, is an even more recent phenomenon, because we have become so frustrated with people that disagree with us, because we pursue media feedback that isolates us, that silos us, because our ability to appreciate someone else's values and perspective has been so undermined that we feel that it is up to us to fix them, to correct them, to get them back on the path of righteousness, which of course, we have monopolized in our view, right? And so it's almost a duty and an obligation to shout someone else's bad ideas down instead of listening. And so I think that there's two things that we need to return to get better at. One of those is just to shut the heck up when you disagree with someone. That's okay. Your life is not going to go down the toilet just because there are people out there that feel differently than you do. And the other one is to be able to ask questions, both as a way of self-education, but also as a way to build bridges and show respect.
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done with how we communicate. There's a quote by Stephen Covey, and I'm sure you have heard of it: seek first to understand, then to be understood. And I try to keep that in mind. And I think if more of that was done, if people just, like you said, took the time to ask more questions and to just listen, and then to be given the space to share what they think and what they believe, I think there would be more harmony in those conversations for sure.
I think that there would be. And then, back to what we were talking about earlier, the practical effects, making the world work better, making our relationships more effective on a practical and objective plane. It is true that people are less effective when they don't understand the people to whom they are speaking.
Absolutely. Well, I really enjoyed our conversation today.
I appreciate, Jamie, you taking the time to talk to me about it.
Thank you. I appreciate your time as well. It was a pleasure to meet you. And thank you for listening to our message about human respect. And through any conversations that you have throughout your journey in becoming president. I hope that you can share a little bit of that with others. And it was truly a pleasure to meet you.
No, thank you. I'm grateful for your time. Do me a favor, and to the extent to which you post any of the recording, just shoot me a link so I can see it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank
All
you
right,
so much.
thank you.
I hope
All
you
right,
have
I
a
hope you have a good
wonderful
rest of
rest
your
of your.
day.
Thank you. Same to you.
All right, take care.
Take care. You as well. Bye bye.